You don't have to prove anything to anybody. It's your lived experience. No one can take that away from you. And if anyone is debating on whether or not you are actually suffering from a mental illness, then baby, they are a piece of shit.
Hello, YouTube. My name is Lydia, and on today's installment of the Body Honesty Project, we will be talking about the copycat effect. Now, the copycat effect happens whenever a major event occurs that spawns other events that mimic it. Now, in news media, this terminology is usually reserved for tragic and violent events, but the copycat effect can be seen in any sort of behavior that we mimic in the media. Some with negative consequences and some without. But for the purposes of this video, we will only be focusing on copycat behavior that results in negative outcomes. And in particular, the copycatting that has been spawned by Miss Tess Holliday. But before we get into the TikToks, I think we need to know a little bit more about the copycat effect. So why don't we watch this next clip, then come back and discuss. What is the copycat effect? The copycat effect occurs when an event or action happens that spawns the creation of other similar events. This term is usually reserved for violent and/or tragic events, but the effect can also be seen in other less serious ways. So, what makes people copy others? When people consume media, they often latch on to personalities they relate to. If their struggle contains similarities to the protagonist, they will draw parallels to their own life. They will soak up their story and make it their own, even if it isn't true. This then inspires them to solve their own issues in a similar manner to their hero. Some media sources would like you to believe that these copycats occur as lone wolves. But in reality, many of them have been encouraged to act, either through online forums or by following the guidance of community leaders. This is accomplished by using brainwashing techniques that prey on insecurities and encourage destructive acts, all with the support of their leader and community. Copycatting encourages mob mentality. People cease to think for themselves and only take the words of their leaders and their community as truth. People become unaware of the harm they cause on others and themselves, and blind to the truth staring them in the face. In the end, copycatting doesn't end up solving any of their own problems, and if anything, it makes them assume the problems of others in addition to their own. So when Tess Holliday announced that she had a restrictive ED and that was the cause of her weight gain, I just knew that this was going to spawn all sorts of copycats. We just needed to wait. And what do you know? Here they are. Now, Tess still professes to have this ED that apparently makes her gain weight despite starving herself. But the conversation has transitioned to be not only about her, but about all fat people. And she's even taking steps to encourage other people to come out with their eating disorder of restriction that causes weight gain. This is no longer just her story. She is an advocate for all obese people with restrictive EDs. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Tess's latest video and see what she has to say.
Woke up from a nap and I want to talk to y'all about what happened to me yesterday because I think it's important to discuss. I have always been really vulnerable online and I have shared my life in a way that has felt good and authentic to me with y'all. And part of that was making the choice to share my eating disorder diagnosis. And obviously the world had a lot to say because I'm fat. And fat people just can't be anorexic, which is not true. I know. And I try to be understanding that there's going to be people that are going to see me, hear me talking about this, and just think, what the fuck? But also, I just think more people should practice critical thinking, but that's too much to ask. Anyway, yesterday I woke up and there were these two pea brains that had posted a video about their shitty podcast, kind of talking about my eating disorder and saying that I was lying, which, okay. But the part about it that bothered me was the deep dive that they did, trying to discredit my lived experiences by saying that, well, she hadn't experienced that, so I couldn't have experienced that. And obviously the math is not mathing. This is just a reminder to those of y'all that might be suffering from an ED like me, that eating disorders are a mental illness. Since coming out with my diagnosis, there have been, medical professionals worldwide that have literally talked about how we need to restructure the criteria that allows them to diagnose people properly, because it has been deeply ingrained in fat phobic, culture. It's weird. It's almost like the medical industrial complex doesn't give a shit about fat people. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. It's your lived experience. No one can take that away from you. And if anyone is debating on whether or not you are actually suffering from a mental illness, then baby, they are a piece of shit. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let somebody use my name to get views and talk about something deeply personal that I chose to be vulnerable about to help others. And TikTok removed my video for bullying in my response to that. But it's fine, because I didn't want to give them views anyway. But just know that you are not alone. I believe you. You are trying your best. You are loved. And that's all that matters. Be well.
So she starts by complaining that somebody made a commentary video about her. I don't know, something probably like this, that questioned whether or not her experience was true or not by comparing it to their own, or even to science, because that Tess claims that she starved and still gained weight. And her claim of, well, the math doesn't math, well, that's right, Tess, the math doesn't math. You defied the laws of thermodynamics. But what's also more interesting here is that she said that she would like people to apply critical thinking. That's what they're doing. And, well, that's what I'm going to do. People are not saying that fat people cannot have a restrictive ED. They are just saying that you cannot have a restrictive ED based on your behavior. Has nothing to do with your weight. Has a lot to do with the fact that your weight hasn't changed, but a lot of overweight people and obese people can have restrictive EDs, provided that they actually have dropped a significant amount of weight due to their restriction. They could still be obese and have restricted themselves down from a more obese state, but you can't gain weight with a restrictive ED. And Tess herself did not even define her ED correctly. This is what she has to say about how she eats.
Would you go a day, 2 days without eating?
Yes, I would have coffee. I would sometimes eat in the evening. I would have bits of whatever was laying around. I'd grab maybe a handful of nuts.
And that is not restriction. And of course, to me, the most damaging part about this video is the end, because this is where she's encouraging all of her followers to adopt the same deluded mentality.
You don't have to prove anything to anybody. It's your lived experience. No one can take that away from you. And if anyone is debating on whether or not you are actually suffering from a mental illness, then baby, they are a piece of shit.
Because Tess believes them, and Tess is encouraging them. Just look at her comments, full of people that seem to believe that they have starved themselves fat. Tess has been able to get so many copycats by pushing two narratives. One, that eating disorders don't discriminate, and two, fat people can also starve.
For the world to say that all I'm doing is sitting around and eat when I'm starving was horrible, because anybody, any size can starve. And we are just conditioned to not care about folks in larger bodies.
She uses these 2 points as a defense as to why people are fat and to push people away and leave her alone regarding what she eats. because you can't say anything to someone about their eating if they have an eating disorder. So let's take a look at one of Tess's copycats and see what arguments about her restrictive ED she has copied from Tess.
Hello, fat people. What's something that you do that you're pretty sure really pisses off thin?
Being in recovery from anorexia as a fat person really seems to piss the thins off. Because if fat people can claim anorexia, suddenly, where are all the romanticized thin white girls gonna get their gold stars from and their I'm special and the I'm the sickest rewards at? Where are they gonna get that? And acknowledging and seeing a fat person who is diagnosed and truly in recovery from anorexia completely disillusions all the fat phobia and the assumptions that you have about what happens when fat people don't eat enough. At the end of the day, it shows you're really not that special for not eating enough, baby. Fat people can do it too. And let's stop glorifying eating disorders. Because it doesn't matter your body size, it's fucking detrimental and no one should have it.
So this one was particularly fraught with entitlement and disillusionment. This is not the acknowledgement of having an ED. This is treating an ED like an achievement or a gold star, as she said. This is dismissing what a restrictive ED truly is, mocking it, and then using it to justify your own bad behavior. And frankly, to me, this is absolutely disgusting. And of course, this wouldn't have been possible if the messaging was not fueled by Miss Tess Holliday herself.
I always thought that I overate. Some people in my life would say, oh yeah, I eat more than Tess. And it was almost like I wore it as a badge of honor.
Let's look at one of Tess's other copycats now and see how she has misconstrued what a restrictive ED is.
100% this. Absolutely. Last week in one of my What I Eat in a Day videos, I had talked about how I was really struggling with my ED that day and how it was really wanting me to restrict. And so in order to get myself to eat, I made sure that I ate my safe foods, which in all honesty weren't exactly as nutrient dense as some other foods were. And the number of comments that I got that were like, you just shouldn't have eaten, or you couldn't have like forced yourself to eat something else. No, because we don't restrict anymore. And if the difference is between not eating at all and eating something that may not be as nutrient dense as other foods, you eat the not as nutrient dense foods. Food has no moral value. All food will nourish you. Simple as that.
So is a restrictive ED now defined as not eating what you want exactly in the time that you want it? How is this solving anything? If restriction is part of your ED and you are obese, you need to acknowledge what's happening on the other side of the ED. You don't fix binge restrict with binge. This is such utter denial of what is actually happening. Our brains are so good at convincing ourselves of things, but in this day and age of TikTok, instead of keeping those voices to ourselves, everybody's being privy to our synaptic firings. Oh, I'm hungry. I shouldn't eat junk food, but I want junk food. Oh wait, am I restricting? Oh, restricting is bad. That causes eating disorders, so I better eat the junk food. Junk food. Healing is good. Tess, you did this because you claim to have a restrictive ED, but then post all sorts of stuff about overeating.
I just had lunch with a friend of mine and we were walking back to our cars and I was like, oh, I am full. And she's like, me too. And I was like, I'm as stuffed as a tick on a 10-day suck.
You've confused people's perception of reality with respect to having a restrictive ED because they do the things that you do and think that they are starving as well. And even though I don't support the narrative of fat acceptance, they have to know that this is damaging to what they're trying to accomplish because all they are doing is adding more stigma to overeating and binging. And the more and more copycats of Tess that come out, the more people feel that they can't actually talk about the real cause of their weight gain, which is the overconsumption of food.
So, when the fuck are we gonna destigmatize binge eating issues in the fat activist body positive community? Because it seems like the conversation around fat people with eating disorders is centered on atypical anorexia, which, yeah, it's really important for people to acknowledge that fat people can have restrictive eating disorders. But there seems to be this huge stigma and silence admitting that for a lot of people with binge eating disorder, they are also fat. And in fact, it's possible their binge eating disorder has contributed to their fatness. I know that's the case for me, and I would really like to be able to talk about that and be honest about that without it suddenly like invalidating my space in the fat activist community, because I admit that maybe the fact that I've always struggled with binge eating and restriction cycles has made me gain weight. The thing is that that's okay. It's fine that that's the reason I'm fat, and it doesn't mean I'm gonna magically become thin. Let's fucking talk about it.
Now, I actually have a lot of empathy for this woman. I don't agree with all things fat acceptance, but I do appreciate her honesty and her desire to talk about a real problem. But Tess Holliday and these other copycats are stifling voices like these, real voices. So when you're watching fat acceptance TikTok cringe and wondering, why are all these obese people coming out with restrictive EDs? You can thank Tess Holliday. The responsibility lands squarely on her shoulders. She started it, and now we have all these copycats. Real leaders provide inspiration, whereas narcissists encourage imitation. You know, back in May of 2021, I remember exactly how upset I was when Tess made this announcement of her ED, that I flicked on my camera and made a rant video, my one and only rant video on this channel, because I was just so upset that someone would have the nerve to make a mockery out of such a debilitating disease. And I remember afterwards being questioned by my friends and family as to why I did that. Like, remember at the time I had like maybe a dozen subscribers. Like, I was a really small channel. And then I was questioning, like, well, why did I do that? Like, I'm not about attacking people for doing whatever they want to themselves. But it was because of this feeling of, you've got such a big platform and you have so many followers, you're going to spawn copycats. And here they are. Tess has spawned all of these copycats, and now she's actively encouraging them to copycat her and continually delude themselves into thinking that they have an ED that they don't have, and not addressing the actual ED that they do have, which is neither good nor honest. And on this channel, we're all about being honest. So until next time, stay body positive, but also body honest.